So you have to press the little button that says "Got it," otherwise you get to leave the meeting. So you're all very welcome again. So we're going to start then by introducing ourselves. I'm Anastasia Crickley. I'm chair of the All Ireland Endorsement Body for Community Work Education and Training, which is the group that are leading on this workshop, and we're looking forward very much to a good discussion and plenty of comment and critique and participation by all of you. And if we go then rapidly to Meredith, Anna, and then Gauker.
Hi, everybody. My name is Meredith, and I'm the Administrative Officer for IACD. So if you're a member of IACD, I probably emailed you a bunch of times. I'm just here for tech support today. So if anybody has any trouble with captions, with the sound, with your microphone, just send me a message and I'll be able to help you.
Thank you very much, Meredith, and thank you for agreeing to help with that. Anna.
Hello. Hi, everybody. I'm Anna Clark. I am chair of IACD, but also for the purposes of this workshop, I'm a consultant with the All Ireland Endorsement Body for Community Work Education and Training. So I'm working with Anastasia and with Kira, and look forward to the conversation to come.
Gauker and then Jan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gauher. I'm from Georgia. I'm a practitioner in Inclusive Practices team, and very glad to see you here. And I'm here to be a part of you, to be in touch with you, and listen important things about the community development.
Thanks, Gauker. Jen, and then Olga.
Hi, I'm Jen. I am based in the UK over in Norfolk, so about as far away from the Irish side as we could get without falling in the sea again. I am an independent worker who supports community development through kind of community research and evaluation. And I'm particularly interested in how practitioners learn their practices and what they then do with them in terms of other practitioners.
Thank you, Jen. Olga, and then Inara.
Okay. I'm glad to see you all. My name is Olga. I'm a practitioner from Georgia. I work with my children in inclusive practices, and I'm very, very glad to see you and to take part with you in this global session. Thank you.
Thank you. And Inara, sorry.
Hello, everybody. I am a member of Inclusive Practices community, and sorry for my English, it's my first experience in English conference, and I'm also studying for a master's degree in community development, so it's very important for me to clarify concepts and phenomena for myself, and I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you, Inara, and not just you, but also anybody else. Please feel free to interject, any of you at any stage, and to ask questions about concepts or names or language that we're using that isn't immediately accessible or understandable, because that can happen. So please just feel absolutely free. We'd very much welcome you doing that. Kira, and then Anna.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kira Shanahan. So I'm the coordinator of the All Ireland Endorsement Body for Community Work Education and Training. I work very closely, obviously, with Anastasia and with Anna. I'm really looking forward to today's workshop, obviously as a contributor, but also for your kind of feedback and insights and questions that people might have. and the discussion arising. Thanks a million.
Anna.
Hello, good afternoon. So Anna Opacic, I'm from University of Zagreb, Department of Social Work, and I just got back from the classroom full with frightened faces of my students when I was listing all the things they have to take into account when engaging in community work. So yeah, happy to be here on this topic with you. And you did a great job with this conference, and you keep us updated so yeah, great job.
I think for that one we need to congratulate our Georgian friends and colleagues in particular, including those of you who are with us this morning. So well done to all of you. Dinara and then Adelaide.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Dinara. I am from Kazakhstan, but currently live in Georgia. As many know, I'm a member of Inclusive Practices team. Nice to meet you all, and wish that our conversation, our meeting was productive. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you, Dinara. Adelaide and then Minnie, who is, I think, our last participant. So Adelaide. Maybe Adelaide is having some difficulties in connecting from Ghana. Adelaide, if you just interject, if you get connected, we'll be very delighted to hear from you. But she hasn't put anything in the chat, has she, by any chance?
No, I've been keeping it. Oh, she has. Yes. Adelaide just said thank you for the opportunity. That was 6 minutes ago, so she's obviously having connectivity issues.
Okay, so we'll go ahead then to Minnie.
Minnie might be the same.
There's nothing in the chat from her, is there, by any chance?
No, I'm just checking. No.
Minnie was in the parallel session I was chairing this morning, but wasn't able to kind of connect.
Okay, so that's okay. She's hopefully able to listen, even if she can't connect and interject. So that's grand. So Anna, will we put up the agenda briefly? And Adelaide, thank you very much. So Adelaide has sent a note saying she's a community development practitioner, which is great. Good to have you with us, Adelaide. I hope you can hear us. And if you put messages like that up, we'll certainly be able to relay them, even if we can't hear you directly. Is there anybody else present whom we haven't had a chance to speak with?
There's Saltanat and Sasha and Minnie.
Saltanat, would you like to introduce yourself?
Saltanat
yes.
has a, oh yeah, sorry.
Thanks, Saltanat.
Good day. My name is Saltanat. Glad to see everyone. I'm a president of a foundation from Kazakhstan. It's a Center of Social Inclusive Programs. And I'm the mom of adopted children. So the theme community, family as a community, as a little community is very interesting for me. I'm very glad to be here. Sorry, I have some problems with connection, but I will try to be here every time.
That's grand. Sasha. Sasha, I'm seeing, but without a microphone somehow. So I'm not sure if she's going to.
Yeah, and there's no messages in the chat from Sasha, but Minnie has just put a message into the chat as well to say she's a social worker from Kazakhstan, but now based in New Zealand. She's, as far as I know, had an earlier message that she might have connectivity issues as well.
Okay. Thanks, Thanks very much. So maybe we'll start by just putting up the agenda that we put together. But given the group and given the makeup of the group, we may amend it as we go along. But Anna, if you're able to, or Meredith, who is somewhere, I think, if we're able to share the agenda with a bit of help from Meredith, that would be great.
I think, Kira, you've got the slides, have you? You're on mute, Kira, sorry.
Anastasia, we just gave an overview of the workshop in the slide rather than putting up the whole agenda, if that's okay, because
yeah. So we can use the first slide then for that purpose.
So do you want, will I speak through it, or do you want to, Stacia?
I'll go. What we set out to do here today is to give you some background with regarding ourselves, which is and we're the All Ireland endorsement body for community work, education and training. Now, using the term All Ireland in our country is an important one, because what that means effectively is that while there are two jurisdictions on the island of Ireland, there's Ireland and then there's Northern Ireland, which is a part of the United Kingdom. When we got independence in 1922, 100 years ago this year, 6 of the northern counties were maintained. And it's interesting that 100 years later, we're now having a discussion about the reunification of the country. So calling ourselves an All-Ireland body means that we cover community work and community workers who are working and living either in Ireland or in Northern Ireland, you know, in the 2 parts of the country. The way we've gone about doing our work is that we've also tried to ensure that anything we put in place has European equivalence, so that it would facilitate people if they wish to move from Ireland to another, from any part of Ireland to another country. So we want to share with you what we're doing and why we're trying to do it in the way that we're trying to do it. So, but we welcome this opportunity to explore how community work is supported, how the profession is supported, how the profession is recognised, and how the profession is developed in other countries internationally. We've gone about doing it in a very particular way, and what we're going to do, first of all, is give you an idea about where we've come from and how we've gone about doing it. And then we were going to break into smaller groups. But given the numbers that are here, we may just dispense with the idea of breaking into smaller groups and have that discussion in the larger group. So we were going to give you a bit of background and an idea about the main characteristics of what we do, have some discussion, and then move on and tell you something about the sort of tools that we are developing and putting in place, and why we're developing those tools in the way that we're developing them, and what we hope they will achieve. And along the way, we value not just your questions, but also your comments and your critique, because that would be really helpful from our point of view. And hopefully we might be able to learn something from you and from your understandings and what is happening for the profession in the countries that you come from. Okay, so to move ahead then very rapidly, and maybe to the next slide as well, the history of community work or community development in Ireland is interesting, because it's one of collective progress and development from the whole idea of rural self-help in the 1930s. The name of the organization involved was called Múinteoir na Tíre, which is Irish for people of the country. So self-help very much focused on people doing it themselves, focused in a way on development, local development issues like electrification, like water, bringing water to rural households, piped water rather than people having to go to their own well, those sorts of things. But so that that began in the 1930s as part of the European movement overall towards rural self-help. And it was a very powerful movement, very focused on collectively bringing about progress for rural Ireland. But the more radical poverty, when Ireland joined the European Union in the mid-1970s, the fairly radical Poverty One programme set up a number of projects throughout Ireland, and also north and south. There were projects set up, and a lot of those projects again used a community work approach, but they were using more what you'd call Paulo Freire principles. So it was a much more radical approach. And then finally, more recently, so far we have a very collective approach. The all-Ireland work that we are now involved in was linked in the 1990s and particularly in the 2000s and onwards to the Northern Ireland peace process. There was considerable unrest in Northern Ireland, what in Ireland we call the Troubles, what maybe some people would call a sort of a war in Northern Ireland. There was and with a number of people killed and a number of bombs, involvement both from those who wanted Ireland to be united in what would be described by some as a terrorist fashion, the IRA, and involvement on the other side from people who wanted Northern Ireland to stay part of the UK, again, in a way that you could describe as terrorists. So, but there was a peace process, which in the end in 1998 led to peace, which still holds just about. So our approach in this has been to take an all-Ireland dimension to what we do, linked in particular to the peace process. So why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this because whether we're looking at the conservative rural self-help in Ireland or whether we're talking about the radical Paulo Freirean influenced community development that began as part of the European Union's first poverty programme with projects both north and south, what we were looking at was a concern with collective progress, with the whole community making progress, rather than just a sort of a more social work approach, which would place the bigger emphasis on individuals. Of course, individuals gained from that collective approach, but the emphasis was on everybody making progress rather than only individuals. So that's where we came from, that's where our thinking came from, and that's what's informed what we do. Now, what we've done then is on the next slide, I think, where our concerns then were to acknowledge professionalism, to acknowledge that community work, community development, in a sense, is a profession that needs professional approaches. Not in a sense, but in effect is a profession that needs professional approaches. And we wanted also, though, to create space so that people who were participants in community projects could also become professionals. So we prioritized marginalized and minority groups. And we prioritized also the idea of ensuring that routes to professional education and training were inclusive of marginalized and minority groups. So we felt that the important starting point for that had to be standards, rather than starting with what a professionalization process or what a professional qualification looked like. We said, what should a professional in community work deliver? What standards should they be working to? So we developed two sets of standards, one of which was called Toward Standards, and the second of which was called Standards, and that was published in 2016. So with that as a starting point, with Toward Standards as a starting point, we then moved to the development of a framework for validating, for endorsing community work education and training. So that was our thinking. That's how we started. We started from a sort of unique collective process. We started with the idea that community work is a profession, but that there had to be routes so that people who would be normally branded participants had an opportunity to become professionals. And the best way to start that was to establish what the standards are, what you expect people to work to, and then using that as a basis to look at what a framework for endorsing, for validating education and training would look like. So, Ciara.
Thanks, Stacia. I'll pick up from here. So as Anastasia said, I suppose our two key planks of AIEB's early work were the development of standards. So our current document is called All Ireland Standards for Community Work. I can share a link in the chat afterwards to that document. They're a set of nationally agreed standards developed on an all-Ireland basis, as Stacia stressed the all-Ireland nature of our work. And the development of those standards built on a previous document towards standards, and also followed consultation that took place on a north-south basis with a range of kind of key stakeholders involved in community work. In the main, community work practitioners, community work organisations and community work educators, but also policymakers and funders, all contributed to the development of those standards. So a set of nationally agreed standards as something that was, I suppose, when Anastasia referred to community work needing a professional approach, what's at the basis of all professional bodies or professional movements is a set of nationally agreed standards. So for us, they're the All Ireland Standards for Community Work. And I suppose the standards also informed, as Anastasia said, the development of an endorsement framework and process to recognise European degree at a European degree in postgraduate level professional qualifications in community work. So they were our kind of two key planks of work. So just to give you, I suppose, a little bit more of a flavour of each one of those. If we look at standards, so I've referenced the All Ireland Standards for Community Work, which were developed in 2016, and the graph on the right-hand side here just outlines, I suppose, what the key values are as outlined in towards standards. So our key 5 core interdependent values that are set out are collectivity, participation, community empowerment, human rights equality and anti-discrimination, and social justice and sustainable development. And they have parallels with the standards as set out by IACD and indeed in the UK Community Development Standards also. There's parallels can be drawn between all sets of values. And underneath each value, we set out the key knowledge, skills and qualities that are required to work to work to that vision or that value. And the values, they form a vision for the profession. They are set out to inform the process of community work, to inform community work practice. So they support community workers in their practice, to reflect on their practice, to identify their ongoing professional development needs and their education and training needs. They also inform education and training providers in the development of their education and training programs, because all education and training programs should be informed by the nationally agreed standards. They inform the work of community work organisations. So, for example, organisations can use the standards in their recruitment of staff, in the support and supervision of staff, in the monitoring and evaluation of their own annual strategic plans or implementation of their work. The standards inform policymakers. So policymakers can utilise the standards when they're designing and delivering relevant policies and programmes. They can also inform the work of funders, so they can be used for funders as a tool to design funding programs or to design initiatives which are to be funded, but also then to monitor the use of their funding and to evaluate programs accordingly. And they can be used by communities, most importantly, I suppose, as community workers, as community work professionals. We're working to serve and working with marginalised, disadvantaged, minoritized communities, and those communities can use the standards to hold us, to hold funders, to hold policymakers to account. The standards clearly set out what it is we're saying we're trying to do, so communities can use the standards then to, I suppose, to hold us account for our work. And I suppose just to say, like, values really form the vision for the profession, and they provide us with the basis for ethical action. They inform our practice, at a micro and a macro level. Then just to speak, I suppose, about our endorsement process. So AIEB set up, established an endorsement framework and process which sets about and monitoring, sets criteria for monitoring and assessing undergraduate and postgraduate programs in community work. And as part of the endorsement process, it's very much a dialogical process. It's an inclusive process. There's engagement. So for example, if we have a new, an institution that wants to seek endorsement for a new community work education and training program, there's a very informal start to this process where they engage with AIEB. In this instance, that would be me as the coordinator of AIEB, to speak about their program, to get advice on the steps they need to take to seek endorsement. And then they start by compiling a submission, and in that submission they would outline the content of the programs, the process for their programs. They would outline, for example, how the rationale for the program, the core values underpinning the program, how the program is going to be structured, how it's going to be the modes of delivery of the program, what element of fieldwork practice will be included, and also how students on the program will be assessed, how they'll be selected, and how staff are recruited onto the program and what different staff will bring to it. So there's a fairly comprehensive submission submitted to AIEB, and then on the basis of that submission, we have a 2-day on-site visit with the providers of the program, and arising from that, programs will receive endorsement for 5 years. For new programs, they'll often receive endorsement for 1 year initially, because there may be some recommendations for further actions they need to take. But it is very much an inclusive and a dialogical process, and what underpins the whole development of the endorsement framework is the standards. And you might say in some ways, like, why develop such a process? Well, we're concerned, I suppose, with the strengthening of the community work profession and the outcomes for communities from engagement with community work. So as part of that, we're concerned to enhance the quality of community development education and training. So arising from the endorsement process, the aspiration is there would be a strengthened and enhanced quality of community development and education and training being delivered, and also essentially that those programs are equipped to support students to develop effectively as professional community workers, and the fieldwork practice element of the programs is a key dimension of that. And I suppose it's just important to say we really stress the importance of fieldwork practice, and fieldwork practice must take up 40% of any undergraduate or postgraduate program at minimum to receive AIEB endorsement. So that's just to give you a snapshot of the endorsement framework and an overview of the standards and their role in informing the work and practice of the profession. I'll stop sharing slides now for a moment, if that's okay.
And have you the question, Ciara, maybe before you stop sharing the slides, have you a question?
Anna's going to share the question, Stacia.
Thanks very much. That's grand. Thanks. So Anna, are you able to share the question then?
I'm going to put the question into the chat for us to have a discussion around.
And how many of us are there? If there are 16, I think maybe should we break into 2 groups, do you think?
Well, I think on the basis that some people have connection issues, that might not work, would be my feeling. Yeah.
We can stay in the plenary, it's no problem whatsoever. So you're putting the question in the chat, Anna, is that right?
Yes, it's in there now. So the question that we wanted to generate some discussion around, conversation, is in your country, how is the profession of community work supported and recognised? And we recognise that is going to vary across countries, but we're very interested to hear what your experience is about how community work as a profession is supported and recognised in your country. So it's really an open conversation.
If you have any questions on what you've heard so far, please feel free to put them in as well. Okay, who'd like to start? And that's a beautiful baby, Inara, that I see. Really nice.
Anna has her hand up there.
Yes,
Go ahead.
I would very concretely. So in Croatia, community work is not recognized, let's say, as a self-standing profession, but the community work is recognized as a, let's say, sort of specialization within the social work profession. So we do have started a postgraduate study in community development, and for more than 10 years, we are having continuous, let's say, summer school for community development, but everything is within the frame of social work profession that has its own chamber, and within the chamber and act on social work. Community work is, let's say, a method within, even though at the faculty here, we advocate the community work is more than a method. So it's a spectrum of different methods, activities, and a complex profession, or at least sub-profession. But yeah, it is not recognized as a self-standing profession, and it's not regulated outside the community, outside the social work. And if I look at the professionals, and actually, I don't think there are many courses outside social work courses that teach community work or community aspects, or yeah. So this is the situation in Croatia.
Thanks very much, Anna. And do you have any questions or comments about what we've been saying so far? Anna, I was wondering if you had any questions or comments.
You are asking me or another Anna?
No, you.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, I was actually wondering about the standards that you mentioned. So, in a kind of, do you, when you are, so your opinion on the programs, graduate and postgraduate studies, what are their, let's say, legal value? Are they just opinion that have to be attached during accreditation process, or they actually have direct impact on the program and their feasibility? And
good question, very good question. Maybe we'll just gather a few comments and take and then respond to all of them. Anybody else like to come in? Victoria, we didn't really hear from you earlier, but you're very, very welcome. We did ask people at the beginning to introduce themselves. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, thank you very much for the invitation. Sorry that I'm late. My name is Victoria. I'm from Ukraine, and I live in west part of Ukraine. In my hometown, it's a safe place, and we have a lot of refugees from all of Ukraine, from big cities, from east part. And now our main work, and it's a work with these people who moved from east part of Ukraine. And I'm happy to be with you, but I'm not ready to answer for this question. Now I still thinking about it. It's not so easy to give answer for this question. It's an interesting topic. Thank you very much.
But we just wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself, and maybe Elena as well, who has joined us, might introduce herself. Thank you, Elena.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Elena. I'm a member of Inclusive Practices team. I'm from Georgia. Sorry, I'm late too. We work here with community of parents with children with special needs, and it is a really interesting theme. And as said Anna, in our country, unfortunately, community worker is not recognized as a professional. Yes, it's not graduated, not disciplined about work, community development worker.
So, thank you, Elena.
Thank you.
Anybody else like to come in?
I think this situation all over post-Soviet space in our countries from post-Soviet space professional of community worker is very unknown and not recognized. My sister is social worker and her status as a volunteer, but it's not as a profession, as a mission of a sorrow.
Thanks, Olga. Thanks very much. Okay. Anybody else got anything they'd like to put in? Or maybe Kira and Anna, would you like to comment on what's been said so far?
Happy to, but I think Jen maybe put a hand up there as well.
Yeah, is that okay? Two things. One, I just have a general request, which is maybe when people ask questions, could we do the answers soon after? I find it quite hard to remember a long time when other things have happened, and I'm working in my first language, and I wonder it might be even harder in your second or third or fourth language. But I'm based in the UK, and the picture's a bit messier here than it was 15 years ago. Community development is recognised as an occupation, but not seen as a profession, which is a bit of a tricky distinction, in that we don't have a professional body in the same way that an accountant would, or a surveyor would, or even a social worker would. We used to have occupational bodies, so we used to have networks and a Federation for Learning and Community Development and another body, but they, due to political changes in this country, they were dismantled, their funding was withdrawn by the government. So now kind of networking and connections between people who see themselves as community development practitioners happens more informally, or through certain funding groups, or through bigger organisations like IACD. For those in England, the situation in Scotland is very different, and again it's different in Wales and Northern Ireland. There is also qualifying routes for people who want to work in community work as part of a youth and community work qualifications. But we still have the English Standards Boards for community development, so they still produce national occupational standards, so a similar set of standards to Ireland, and that's just up for review at the moment.
And I'm going to ask Anna, because we are, of course, as an all-Ireland body, we have a direct concern about the national occupation standards. Just by way of explanation, there used to be throughout the England, Scotland and Wales, an organisation called, what was it called? Community
Development Foundation?
No,
not the Federation of Community Development Learning.
Oh no, there was ACW, the Association of Community
Workers,
which was around for a very long time, which I was actively involved in myself when I worked and lived there, and in Ireland we have Community Work Ireland, which is an organisation national organisation for anybody who is interested in community work, alongside the All-Ireland body for endorsement of community work, education and training. And indeed the existence of such networks has been really important. Similar to the situation in the UK, the sort of ritualized recognition of community work as a profession hasn't happened in Ireland. But what we're struggling to try to do, and which indeed is what the English Standards Body tried to do, and what the colleagues in Scotland have done successfully, is to figure out what sort of a profession we want to be, because whether community work needs to be a profession in the same way as social work, Anna, for example, is perhaps an open question. So part of what we've been doing as we go along is struggling with conceptualization of what we're doing, and how we're doing it, and why we're trying to do it in that particular way. So your question also about social work was an interesting one from that point of view, and I'll come back to that later about community work not being recognised as a separate profession, but as a method in social work. And we're certainly very conscious of that process, which in Ireland we were able to avoid a bit because of that collective approach, sometimes conservative and sometimes more radical, that existed with regard to community work. But there is an issue there as well. But I'll hand over to Ciara and Anna to speak about the dimensions that they're concerned about.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Ciara, go on ahead.
No, I was just going to say you take the floor first, Anna, that's all.
Can you screen share again then, please, Ciara?
Yeah, just give me a moment.
But just in response to Jen's question about the national occupational standards, perhaps you'd tell people something about that as well, Anna, and where we're at on it.
Yes, so sorry, misunderstood you there. What you will have picked up from this conversation is that there are, for us in Ireland and also for practitioners in the UK, there are existing standards that are different from the international standards, which I know many of you in the post-Soviet space will be familiar with, the international standards that IACD has produced. Which have been translated into many different languages. So I know that several of you will be familiar with those. Before the international standards were developed, we already had standards for community development in the UK, and we also had in Ireland, all Ireland standards for community work. So those standards help to shape and inform the international standards, along with other standards for community work in other parts of the world. The status of those standards varies, and in the UK, they did have a statutory function for a while, and they were reviewed every 5 years, and they're about to be reviewed again. So in Northern Ireland, we have UK standards, we also have the All Ireland standards, and we can refer to the international standards as well. Now, AIEB as an All Ireland body is very focused on building relationships north and south. That's really critical for us. We're working across 2 different political jurisdictions. But it is important for us to build the profession of community work on an all-Ireland basis. So the all-Ireland standards are the ones that will enable us to do that. And that's where our focus is. But we have to make sure that when other standards are reviewed, that we are part of those discussions so that we can ensure complementarity and alignment. And that's very important. So for us, it's important that we look at the values that are expressed in different standards and seek to ensure they are compatible, and also seek to ensure that particularly education and training provision that might be mapped to different standards is also compatible north-south as well. So we will be involved with the review of the UK standards, even though we're working on an all-Ireland basis, and we'll be part of the steering group and supporting the engagement around those processes as well.
Thanks.
Yes, and I suppose just to follow on from Anastasia and Anna, and I suppose referring back to some of the questions, so what we're really attempting to do is to build support for and strengthen the community work profession. So we're very much on a journey. So I think, Anna, your question just in terms of the status of the endorsement of programs. So programs will get their own validation from within national validation systems. But what we are coming in to do, and it is on request of programs themselves, is to endorse programs as a professional qualification. So I suppose we're clearly setting out a set of criteria to say these are the kind of benchmarks that you need to meet to achieve what is considered professional qualification. That is very much in line with what's done in other professions, be that social work or youth work, for example, or social care. So we're some way behind social work and social care in that regard, but we are trying to build and strengthen the profession overall. But it is a journey we're on. It's not a journey that we've completed. And indeed, Anna will speak to some of the other key areas of work that we're involved in. And I suppose just to refer back to Jen as well, I mean, we are working in a contested space, you know, so for example, you will find modules on community development being taught across other disciplines and people from those disciplines securing employment in community work. And what we're trying to, I suppose, build support for the fact that it is a profession, a distinct profession in its own right, that requires a distinct set of knowledge, skills and qualities to be developed through professional education programs. But it is a journey. And it's a journey by no means we're by no means at the end. It's very much a journey that we're on, and a struggle, I suppose, that we're on also.
I think maybe to just add to that, when we were speaking about the standards, and Ciara was saying that they had been developed in consultation, they were developed really from the ground up. And the standards as they're represented, words like collective, words like participation, words like rights, they came from the practice experience of community workers on the ground. So the standards came from practice. They came from what people were doing. And we felt as we worked on their development that that was had to be the fundamental starting point, that you started with, in community work terms, where people are at. So the standards grew from the practice that people were engaged in, the key dimensions of the practice they were engaged in, which they told us were about collective progress, which they said had to be about participation, which they said had to be about rights, had to be about minorities, had to be about disabled people, had to be about women and the inclusion as women. So, you know, this is where they came from. And that gave them a bit of power. That gave towards standards power and gave the standards a bit of power. And then when we set about trying to, as Ciara said, it's work in progress. It's a bit of push and pull. The standards are well recognized by practitioners, and the standards are well recognized by funders, by the state, by others. But sometimes it suits the state to call anyone a community worker. You know, you just give them the title and let them off. And I bet a lot of you are fairly familiar with that process. So there is a journey to be gone. But since COVID, and particularly at the moment with the crisis situations that are developing, not just here, but elsewhere, the states are beginning to realize that you need people with skills, that people need to be able to do things. And we're saying it's not just a question of being able to put square pegs in square holes and round pegs in round holes. It is about participation, and it is about involving people. And so it's a little bit of, you move a bit forward. The standards are now well established, but it's getting the whole idea of a proper professional process established. And part of that, Anna, in final answer to your question, is about social work as well. I mean, I'm old enough and long enough in existence to know about the three, as Alice Salomon prescribed, the three methods of social work being group work, individual work, and community work. And the way we see it is that community work, as it's undertaken by social workers, is very often about bringing groups together so that individuals in the group make progress. Whereas community work, as undertaken by, and there's nothing wrong with that, it could be quite a good outcome, for example. But the way we see it, community work as undertaken by community workers is about and should be about bringing groups of people together to make collective progress for the whole group, and inter alia to make advancement for individuals who are part of the group and other individuals as well. So, you know, we feel that that sort of distinction is really important, and we feel that it is the one that helps to, from our point of view, describe community work as separate. Well, irrespective of whether it's conservative or whether it's about total change, that it is about moving things forward for a whole group of people. So that's the way we've tried to understand it and articulate it. We are clear about the debates, but we're also very clear that as social work has gone on in this part of the world, and I wouldn't like to speak for the East or for your parts of the world, but as social work has gone on in Western Europe, increasingly social workers are being called to do individual work, like child protection work and work that is explicitly concerned with individuals. So we're conscious that even within social work training now, there's less community work. So there is an opportunity there also to move things forward. Okay, sorry, that was a bit long-winded, my apologies, but it's just by way of explaining. Will we move on then to the next phase, Anna, with yourself, where we're going to talk a little bit about the instruments that AIEB has been striving to develop in support of all the things we're saying.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm sorry if you can hear a strange noise behind me. One of my dogs is snoring, so apologies. But I think there's, in terms of the dimensions and the elements that we are looking at here on an all-Ireland basis, some of that is very specific, and where we are at is a different place from other countries and other parts of the world in terms of professional development for the workforce, community development workforce. But for us, it was very important to develop an understanding of what does that look like now, to capture that picture. What does the workforce look like now, to get an understanding of that, and also what does the education and training provision that we have on an all-Ireland basis look like now. So we've done some scoping work to look at the different qualifications that exist and the different levels. Now, don't worry too much where it says level 10 or 8 or 5, because this is in Ireland. In your country, it could be very different. And you will see, you know, it even varies on an all-Ireland basis. So it's complex. But for AIEB, we have set the benchmark for professional qualification for community workers at honours degree level, which then means that provision above that exists, but also we have training programs and qualifications below that level. What we're very keen to do is to ensure the community work quality of that provision and look at how the range of programs support people through their learning and their practice development to the point of becoming professionally qualified. So AIEB endorses, Kira has already talked about this, AIEB has an endorsement process for degree programs and postgraduate programs. And what we are looking at now, Kira, if you'd like to maybe move on to the next slide, is a range of other elements that we can put in place and support to build recognition for the community work profession. Now, there are four big blocks to this. We've already talked about endorsement of degree and postgraduate programs, but we're looking at the way in which we can establish quality assurance of those qualifications below degree level as well, and ensure that they're all mapped to the standards, the All Ireland standards, and that the criteria are relevant and meaningful for supporting people who are involved in community work. So that's an important aspect, looking at the range of qualifications that exist and the quality assurance processes of those at different levels, and ensuring that people can move through them in a way that's meaningful. We're also very keen to look at how we can support development of the workforce through that progression and beyond when they are professionally qualified. We also recognise that we have in Ireland a lot of people who've been working in community work for many years, and some of those are extremely experienced, highly skilled, but have not undertaken a professionally endorsed qualification. It's important for us to build and incorporate their support for building the profession. So we're looking at how we can recognise their individual experience and practice, and put that structure in place. We're also looking at, we have undertaken a survey of workforce practitioners to find out what their learning and development needs are and how we can respond to that, how that can be responded to on an All Ireland basis. And we've also looked at the continuous practice and professional development opportunities, because we recognise that somebody can become qualified, but they might have qualified maybe 10 years ago or 6 years ago, but the environment that we're working in is constantly changing and evolving, and we need to keep our practice up to date. We need to continue learning, and we need to reinforce the importance of continuing to learn about our practice and the factors that affect our practice. So continuous professional development is also a really important element of what we are looking at, and we're building the building blocks to support practitioners to engage in continuous practice and professional development. Some of that is short courses, some of it is attending conferences like this, some of it is about being part of networks and associations so that you can learn from others who are involved in work within the field as well. But we have to look at the mechanisms and support that in a structured way. We're also very much concerned about ensuring that learning and education opportunities are accessible for people across the whole of Ireland. We have cities, and it's very easy to access education and qualifications in a university if you're just a few miles away. But if you're living on the west coast of Ireland, which is very rural, then it's a different matter. So we also need to look at how accessible education and training programs are, and work with providers to increase the accessibility of their provision, and look at some of the barriers that participants and students might experience. And that might be to do with cost. It might be to do with, as Anastasia said right at the start, supporting the diversity of communities into that field of practice, and then putting in place specific mechanisms that support them through that process. So access and equality of access is really important as well, and we're looking at those issues. And the last area that our work is focusing around is building the discipline and the practice by actually advocating for community development as a profession. It's important that we continue to have these discussions because we need a shared understanding. When we talk about community development, do we have the same understanding of what that means as a profession? And we need to continually engage and encourage and open up that dialogue to help us get that shared understanding. That's really important for us on a north-south basis because we are two different jurisdictions, but it's also important, as Jen highlighted very early on, east-west for us in terms of Ireland and the rest of the UK. And I say the rest of the UK from the north because we're part of that in one respect. So there are lots of complex issues politically and structurally that we have to be aware of and work through, and build that understanding of the profession with employers and with policymakers and those who have a role to develop programs that are national programs that support community work. So those are some of the main areas of work that we're involved in, and we're taking action on all of those, as well as the endorsement of degree programs. And we have a number of degree programs already endorsed, professionally endorsed, that you can see on the AIEB website as well. So you may have some questions about some of those areas, but we also wanted to open this up again for another discussion as well.
Thanks very much, Anna. So questions or comments welcomed, or if some of it sounded, if you weren't too clear about it, please feel free to ask.
Yes, I want to ask. Anna, I write you, but I can ask you. How do you find the balance between the accumulated experience and training based on practice and the needs for a new, fresh look at the community work profession and other new trends in profession?
That's a great question, Olga.
I mean, in fact, what do you think I mean, I think that's a very good question and a comment, but all of you might like to pick up on that as well as us, though. What do you think yourself, Olga?
I think it was something collaboration between generation, between a practitioner with big experience and young people with a fresh look, but I don't know how it's worked, and I want to ask you how it can be.
And Ciara, would you like to, because that's part of the reason why, look, the reality of life is for people who are nearly my age, they're not going to go and do an education in community work. They've worked at it all their lives. So, and they know a lot about it, or they think they know a lot about it. But one way or another, we're not going to be able to get them to do a professional education. So there is a bit in starting a new profession, like what we're trying to do, in bringing people with you, in acknowledging and respecting the knowledge that they have on one hand. And that's why Anna in particular and Ciara have been working on this. It's a route to recognize people. There won't be too many of them, I hope. A route to recognize people who have worked all their lives in the field. Maybe Ireland isn't that big, who've worked all their lives, either north or south, worked all their lives in the field and really wouldn't be able or wouldn't consider doing education. And then the other, so that's why, you know, we felt that that's a sort of it's a reaching out. And some of these are the people who actually helped to write the first standards. These are the people who said it should be collective, it should be about participation. So we're not talking about an unknown group of people out there. We're talking about the people who were actively involved in writing the first standards. And this is a way maybe of recognizing their contribution. But the other part of your question still stands. How do you recognize them on one hand and still, you know, sort of infuse the profession with new ideas and new things? Ciara, maybe you'd like to pick up on that, especially about climate, for example, which is an idea that all ones like me mightn't have given a lot of thought to, you know. So
Yeah, so just to pick up directly reference climate, which Stacia referred to. So obviously the whole issue of climate change and its impact on marginalized or the communities with whom community workers work is becoming an issue that I think community workers are struggling to engage with. So one of the things we've done is we've developed a response by running thematic workshop for community work practitioners to develop their own understanding of how to engage with the issue of climate justice, how to use a community or how to work as a community worker to address the injustice that marginalized communities are experiencing. And associated with that, we also are developing a resource that can be used by organizations and practitioners on a wider basis, but also for community work educators. So, you know, we will go and every 5 years, a program will go through an endorsement process, but new issues emerge over time, climate justice being one of those, that community work educators also have to support students to develop the knowledge and skills to engage with that issue. So we've developed, for example, we recently developed guidance for community work education programs on how they embed an anti-racism approach in their programs. We're now currently developing guidance for how they embed a climate justice approach in their programs. What we mean by that is how they infuse throughout the program the opportunities for students to develop their knowledge and understanding of the issues and how they address them using as professional community workers in the field. And I think also something that struck me yesterday, actually at another workshop I was at, you were talking about sort of intergenerational learning and cooperation. So, for example, the community work programs that we have endorsed send students on fieldwork placements, and on those placements they have they have people who supervise the students on placement. A huge amount of those people do have professional qualifications, but many of them are also those very individuals we're talking about who've been involved in the field for a very long time, and they have spoke about that opportunity of having, when there's a student on placement with them, the opportunity for sharing learning, for the community work professionals themselves to learn from the new set of eyes that the student is bringing to the situation, and the student themselves learning from their engagement with the senior community work practitioner. But in essence, so that's something that the community work education process can bring. But what we're doing is develop guidance to support community work education providers, but also the continuous professional and practice development opportunities for people working in the field. And we'll develop that we'd have focus groups or roundtables to see what people's learning, needs are in the sector, and then try and work with our stakeholders, work with education providers, work with Community Work Ireland to develop training initiatives to respond to those needs.
Anna, back to Olga's complicated and very important question from you.
Yes, and I'm conscious we've got another question from Aidana, and I saw Jen's hand go up there as well, so this is great. I think one of the things that's probably useful to say in relation to recognising experienced, shall we say, mature practitioners who have been working in the field for many years, managing projects and programs and probably teams of workers. What we wanted to do was, we acknowledge that people like that are not going to go, people at that stage are not going to go back and do a degree. But they are very experienced, and we need them to be building this process with us. So we looked at what other professions, allied social professions, have done in relation to this particular issue. We looked at youth work, we looked at social work, we looked at health and social care professions, and this idea of individual recognition was something that other professions have put in place, but for a time-limited period. So it's not open-ended, but it is recognising we have a tier of practitioners who have all this knowledge and experience, and we need to recognise that. So that's what the individual recognition process is about, and it's recognising their experience and practice, and acknowledging that. So there is a process of them sharing, you know, here is the evidence of my experience and practice, usually in relation to a history of their employment, and that's checked, and there's a letter of recognition that is issued, and we need to build acceptance of that process as well. But it's time limited, it's not open-ended. You can't in 2-3 years time come along and say, oh, here I am now and I want this recognition. But it's an accepted aspect and element of recognizing those who are highly experienced already in the discipline.
Okay.
Conscious of the other questions coming in as well.
There are 2 more questions that I can see in the chat, but I'm just wondering if there's anybody else here who hasn't put a question in the chat who wants to ask one.
Jen has her hand.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to come back on Olga's question and your 3 responses, if that was okay, rather than...
Keep going.
Okay, so some research that I was doing about how community development practitioners learnt their practices, a lot of that happened outside of formal structured learning, and that many of that learning happened informally through practice settings from other practitioners, and yet that often went unrecognized. And so I was thinking in terms of Olga about bringing new experiences into the profession, that is something that happens in parallel to the kind of standardized learning. And I just wonder if there's a way through the kind of endorsement framework and beyond, that in formal learning settings, we can learn as practitioners how our actions might be influencing the learning of others, and then also how we might be learning from others and creating that kind of critical reflective space in which we can recognize that that's happening and relate it back to our previous experience.
Okay, because that, in a sense, as things stand, we have 2 dimensions where that should be happening, one of which is part of the endorsement process and the other of which is part, as you're saying, and quite correctly, Jen, beyond it. But Ciara, do you want to come in there?
Apologies. Yeah, it's funny, Jen, actually, that's something that has also come up at our roundtable discussions with practitioners, that need for critically reflective spaces and looking at kind of peer learning spaces that could happen in residential settings. So that's something that we're looking at as part of the development of the CPD framework, some initiatives that will respond to that identified need. It's something that's repeatedly come up. So even, for example, recently we had our thematic workshop looking at a community work approach to addressing the issue of drugs in communities. And what came again coming up there was people, we had very much a structured workshop style set up for that, but what people really wanted was that opportunity for peer engagement, for peer discussion, for critical self-reflection, and that's what they valued most about that space, because people were all bringing a huge amount of experience to the table, but maybe just needed to reflect on their experience and the approaches they'd undertaken and learn from others. I think that's really critical for us going forward, to work with, in particular, Community Work Ireland, but others, to create those opportunities and spaces for community workers.
Okay, I'm going to go to Anna, and then I'm going to pick up on the other 2 questions, which are, and ask for final comments from Anna and Ciara with regard to them. So if there's any other final questions, because I want us to try and finish by 1:30 if we can. If there are any other final questions, you might think them, you might have them ready. Anna, in response to Jen's very interesting comment.
Well, I think Kira has kind of covered pretty much most of that, really. I think the idea of peer learning, peer support, and the networking and sharing of practice is absolutely fundamental to community development work. And whatever support mechanisms can be established, but certainly through continuous practice and continuous professional development structures, that needs to be. We need to ensure that that is included within that framework.
And I suppose the other part, Jen, that I was alluding to is that this is already 40% of practice that people undertake as part of their professional training. And we have always, and certainly as someone who's been involved in education of community workers most of my life, we've always acknowledged that the key to that isn't the sort of direct supervision. It is actually the interactions and the informal context within which learning takes place there. So in demanding that 40% of time is given to practice, it's a very practical demand, and it's a demand that goes beyond just the assessment, which is very important as well, so that you can't write a note saying with a bit of a sort of a made-up myth in it about how wonderful you were at doing the job so that you get assessed on your capacity to do it. But really, we know as educators that key learning happens in all sorts of ways. In fact, all of you involved in organising this conference, I'm sure, can tell me right now today that key learning has developed in all sorts of ways as you were involved in pulling things together over the last weeks and the last months and the last days and the last hours. So we're very conscious of that, and I think it's a really important point you're making, and it's very important that we get beyond it. And while I have the floor, I'm going to say as well, you mentioned youth and community work qualifications. In Ireland, North and South, and in the UK, there are youth work endorsement bodies, and we're very clear, and I'll have to say very straight back to you, that the youth and community work qualifications are not community work qualifications. They are in effect youth work qualifications, which have some sort of additionalized terminology thrown in at the end. So
absolutely, where I come from too.
Yeah. I just thought I would say it, because I knew from the way you said it that you actually shared that view. So, and we have a concern about that, because less and less of those programs involve, years ago they used to, but less and less of those programs now involve any bit of a focus on community work. Again, as youth work has more demands. Now, I'm going directly now to the last two questions, which a very interesting question from Edana about the problems most often encountered by professional community workers, by the community work profession and professionals community workers, and a very good question from Geiker about theory to practice and the links that are made in one way or another between the two. So Anna and Kira, would you like to comment on both of those? And then we're going to have to wind up, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, in relation to the problems, or I think actually what you posed was a question that we were hoping to pose back to everyone in discussion, really, which are some of the challenges for community work today. And there are plenty of them. I think Kira actually highlighted some of those really critical ones that we really need to get to grips with, because we are, our world is evolving and changing, and incredibly quickly in terms of climate, and we are in a climate emergency, and increasing issues of racism, particularly in relation to migrants, refugees, movements of people as well, and all of those things are interlinked. And I think one of the big issues that we as community workers have to try and support around that consciousness raising and understanding is how connected a lot of these issues are. We talked, Anastasia talked in her speech, the other day, yesterday, was it? It seems a long time ago, about social determinants These issues are all interconnected, and we have to work at a critical level to support the understanding of that. We have got to get to grips with the complexities of all of that and understand why these major issues for our communities and societies exist. Why do we experience poverty to the extent that we are? Where is this coming from? And you know, we also, I think, a big challenge for us is not just about dealing with the here and now. That you know, people are hungry. They don't have food on the table. We need to set up a food bank. Those things are really, really valuable and important, but we can't stop at that. We have to question and challenge why these things are happening. And our education for community work and community development needs to support those coming into the profession to be critical and asking those questions, and not just asking them, but actually pushing those who are responsible for creating and making decisions that lead to these issues, feel that there is that's part of their role, and understand that it's part of their role in working alongside the communities they're working with to support those processes as well. So I'm conscious of time, so I'll leave that one there. But I think those are some of the big challenges for us at the moment.
Ciara.
Yeah, I think Anna's captured it pretty well, but I suppose just to reinforce a point, and I think this is probably fairly universal. So often as community workers, I think what we're struggling with is the way work is funded and measured. We are forced into situations that is about addressing people's basic unmet needs. It is about providing a service, and it's pulling us away from that work that's about developing the community's capacity to critically engage and address the issues that they're experiencing and to really affect change. I think that's a constant tension point, and I think that becomes even more I suppose you can shine a spotlight on that more when we're having to engage with kind of new and emergency issues. So, for example, in an Irish context, the Ukrainian refugees who have immediate unmet needs that need to be addressed, but there is a wider piece of work that needs to be done with people coming into the country and also the communities with whom they're moving into. So that's, I suppose, it's just that tension point between being, I suppose, pigeonholed into delivering a service provision, as opposed to having the opportunity to engage in real and meaningful critical community work that will, I suppose, move us towards long-term and long-lasting and sustainable change for communities.
Thanks, Ciara. And I'm conscious there's a question from Anara I'm going to answer now for a finish, and thank you very much for that. I think a key problem for all of us involved in this work is globally its recognition, you know, and our ongoing need to assert what we do as a profession, but also as a contribution. It's a vocation as well as a profession, in my view, but to assert it as a contribution. And I think there remains a challenge to do that. So secondly, as regards the theory to practice link, I think that one of the key things we need to do is to continue to struggle to develop our theory. And that dynamic relationship that you spoke about, Geiger, I think is a really important one. We need to continue to struggle to develop our theory, not to see community work theory just as a sort of a rather kind of crude application of sociology or psychology or geography or whatever other theory we're using, but to use those because they do inform this applied discipline, but to use them appropriately along with other emerging things, to use practice in the way that Margaret Ledwith and others speak about, Freire spoke about, you know, so that we inform practice by theory and develop it further in order to become practice and in order to inform theory again. I think those sort of moves are really important. And then lastly, as regards practice to theory for students, and well done, and particularly well done to Agar and to the other colleagues for developing the master's programme in community work. I think for students, the most important bit is the bit that we've spoken about, which is that opportunity to engage in practice. That's the real, they actually, students in my experience actually learn a lot about theory from actually having to do it. They also learn that there's no direct crude relationship between the two. You know, it's a bit about how one informs the other. You're not going to automatically see Talcott Parsons structural functionalism, for example, hopefully not anyway, represented in every community that you have something to do with. But you will. So well done for getting your masters off the ground. We'd all be delighted to support you in any way we can. And can I actively encourage you to get students engaged in practice and give them opportunities to reflect on it. And thank you all very much for being with us today. Do any of you have any final words you'd like to give us? We won't respond because there isn't time, but is there any final words you'd like to give us, any of you?
Anastasia, I did put in the chat as well that we will make a note of the questions, and if we feel there are some things that perhaps we've missed, we will come. I've got a picture of everyone who is here, so we can come back to you with some follow-up as well, if that would be useful.
And are people happy to have your pictures, you know, for us to have your pictures as well? A screenshot. Okay, that's grand. And thank you all very, very much for your time, and lovely to see that lovely little baby.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of this really important and very, very useful conference, and particularly thanks to Meredith for her help with the technology. Thankfully, we didn't need too much. That's really good today. But thanks in particular also to all of you who've been involved in organising these few days. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody. Lovely to meet you.
Take care, everyone. See you again very soon.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.